Welcome to the JAMODI podcast. We are all surrounded by amazing coaches and leaders. So let's get an inside look at not just what they do, but how they do what they do. After all, becoming the best versions of ourselves is JAMODI, just a matter of doing it.
Are you ready to level up your team skill development? Well, Bology is here to support you in driving accountability and skill development. The Bology app is more than just tracking. It's a resource for enhancing skills, knowledge, and mindset across your program. Join coaches all across the country using Bology to simplify training and empower your athletes. Let's build consistency, accountability, and skill development together.
You just talked about the assistant coach role being so fresh in your mind. So now you move over those 18 inches or 6 inches. I've heard some people call it 6 because, that's how close the chairs are, 18, whatever it is. But moving over into the new role, how did you this season divide up those responsibilities, especially since they were so close in the front of your mind?
Yeah, I'm definitely more of an 18-inch guy than 6-inch guy because I like a little bit of space between the chairs on the bench. So that's that. I know people do say 6 inches. I'm going to go 18. One of the things that I really wanted to do was I wanted to surround myself with great people. Right? It's not a good thing when you're the smartest person in the room. It's always better to be around people who are great. And have strengths where you have weaknesses. One of the things that, and you may or may not be familiar with the Enneagram, but I'm an Enneagram 1, and it's a personality type.
Okay.
I'm personality types, but I'm a perfectionist, and so and that probably hits a lot of people. But something that I struggle with is not being good at something or there being a weakness. And I heard from a professional coach in the NBA, but like all coaches have strengths and weaknesses. At the NBA level, everyone's a good coach, right? You don't get to the NBA level without being a good coach. But even the best coaches have strengths and weaknesses. And so that's just been a good mindset shift for me going, okay, I'm not going to be great at everything, and recognizing where I have weaknesses and then making sure that you surround yourself with people who can maximize those weaknesses. And so we have a phenomenal staff here at Harding. Our assistant coach, his name's Bradley Spencer. He was a teammate of mine for 4 years at Harding. And so,
Nice.
I love Harding. It changed my life. And then if you talk to Bradley, he could tell you a very similar story about just what Harding did for him and the love that he has. In recruiting, that's extremely valuable too, right? When we're saying, all right, I've literally been in the classrooms that you'll be in, all of that stuff. So that's great. But Bradley was a high school head coach for the last several years, most recently in his hometown before he came to Harding with me. And so he had been a head coach and I had not, right? So it was me taking a role that I had never been in, and also him maybe taking a step back or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
But him going from being a head coach to an assistant coach, I know that is a tough transition too. And so I wanted to be very mindful of that. At the Division II level, some schools may have 2 assistant coaches. At Harding, we have 1 assistant coach. And so because of that, there is a lot of responsibility. If I'm thinking of what I learned this year, one of the big things was, as an assistant coach, especially at the college level, how do you stand out? How do you carve out a valuable role in a program? Well, recruiting is the main thing, right? Is your ability to recruit. Typically, those are the people who get better jobs or keep their job because they're at a place that's winning or whatever. And so, but it was all player focused. And going from the assistant coach, where I've been all about recruiting and players and all that, to the head coach, I found that a lot of my time was on tasks that don't necessarily involve players, right? It's you're in meetings that I was never in before, or fundraising or budgeting or, whatever. There's lots of things that are part of my day that don't involve our players. And so I had to lose some control over what I would like to think made me successful or helped me have success over the previous 8 years, which is you're doing a lot of recruiting. And so turning some of that over, handing some of that off. But more basketball specific, Bradley, our assistant coach, right? I wanted to make sure that he felt valued in games and in practices. And one of the best things a head coach can do is they can make their assistants feel valued. And, that as an assistant coach, when you're valued, I mean, you will run through the wall for your boss. And when you don't feel valued, it's really hard to be motivated. And so I worked for someone who in games we were on the same page, but in games it was like, hey, whatever I say. Sometimes we'd be like, you don't always have to go with what, like, I may not be right about everything, but that's how they made me feel, was like, like I was helping our team win in practice, during games. And so I wanted Bradley, our assistant coach, to have a big role with that. On the floor, he handles all of our defense. And so I know that there are lots of people moving to kind of the football model, which is what I would say of, you have an offense coordinator, defense coordinator, special situations coordinator, whatever. Our staff isn't big enough to have a setup like that. But I found that me running the offense and him running the defense, it really allowed us to maybe just hone in our focus on the thing on that area. And so that was really valuable. There were lots of other responsibilities that Bradley had, but just that was a big one that for our program, it really worked. He's the energy guy. He's the motivator guy. That's great for defense. And he did a phenomenal job with that this year. But moving forward, that's our setup. And I really liked how that went.
And I think it shows a lot of maturity and a lot of confidence from the head coach to give up a side of the ball or that much, like you said, control. Wes Watson at McKinney High School, when I was his varsity assistant, we did that. I was the offensive guy. He was the defensive guy. And it really was great to divide up those responsibility and focuses, because the idea of the head coach being able to, yes, we can watch both ends, but have the same focus from play to play on each end, because something that happens on the offensive end that is stuck in your mind and that you're trying to work out, that you're trying to communicate, man, that ball is moving. And now the other side, and you can't just take a break. You can't just let it go. So you split those responsibilities. And I just celebrate you for doing that, because it's hard to do. And Coach Watson, I was always impressed with, because I was only 25 at the time when he kind of let me do that. And that takes a lot of trust.
We want to play fast. And had I not done that, I think, instead of on a defensive miscue or something, and I would be focused on that instead of, all right, now let's push the ball. Let's try to get something easy. An unintended consequence in the best way was, I was coaching, once you get into your season, a lot of times the rotations, settle, and you end up, here are the 8 or 9 or 10 guys, or however big however many guys you play, that kind of just settles. And so in season, if you're coaching both sides of the ball, then, I don't know how everyone structures practice, but for most people, you have maybe an offensive period and a defensive period or something along those lines. Well, if you're coaching all of it, then you're spending 100% of your practice time with those 8 guys or 9 guys who play, right? You have them on offense, and then you switch to defense, you have them on defense. And the intended consequence that I loved was, I was able to spend time with everyone during practice. And that was really valuable to me. I did find, as a head coach, I just didn't have enough hours in the day to connect with everybody outside of practice. And so I knew that at least during practice, I was able to touch each person, because we were going to be together at some point in practice. Everyone on our team would get some time with me. And that was an unintended consequence that was really beneficial, I felt like, in the long run.
One thing you said a little bit ago about losing control over some of those things, I think it's a great question for coaches to ask themselves. What is it out of my day, the things that I am in charge of, that I could lose control over and delegate to somebody else? I think if you don't ask that question, so many of us, we can just put our head down. We love the work. We love routines. And we just go through months and months of doing things that aren't necessary for the head coach's job. And you've got people that you want to empower to do more. But if you don't ask that question, so like I always try to think of, like, from these talks, what's an action item that I can take from it? Looking through my season, the day, maybe a fall, spring, or whatever chunk of time, and what are the things that I'm spending a lot of time on that I could lose control over and delegate to somebody else? I think that's a good question for us to ask.
Yeah, and and I don't know if this is the best question to ask, but there is a head coach who I know well who his lens or his filter on that is, does this affect winning? And if it does, then I need to be involved with it. And if it doesn't, then I can delegate it to somebody else. And so, again, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about what's the best question there because there are lots of things that affect winning that I may not necessarily be able to be directly involved with. I mean, academics is something that Coach Spencer spends a lot of time on. And does that affect winning? I think it certainly affects winning because there's a pretty strong correlation between people handling their business on the floor and in the classroom. Just finding the right filter, the right question to ask, and then finding ways that you can go, okay, I can release some of this. And also being mindful that I'm preparing my staff for hopefully a bigger role or more responsibility, or just making sure that they're better prepared to, whether that's them being with you for another year or, moving on to maybe a different role on a different staff, and making sure that you're preparing them. On my journey, there were so many people who did that, right? Like everywhere I went, it was, I took these handful of things away, but I worked for people who were intentional about preparing me for the role I'm in now. I'm very appreciative of that.
Thank you for checking out today's episode. Please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast, share it with your fellow coaches, and find us on social media for what's coming up next on the JAMODI podcast. It's just a matter of doing it.